Good morning and welcome to this year's Sporting Heritage Conference. My name is Fran Stovold and I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage, and it's my pleasure to introduce this opening session. In this session, we'll be hearing a few words from our event sponsors, the Arc Heritage, and then moving on to our opening keynote speakers from Pippa and Amazon. But I'd like to kick off with a few words of welcome from our director, Justine Riley.
Hello and welcome to this year's Sporting Heritage Conference. I'm Dr. Justine Riley and I'm the Strategic Director of Sporting Heritage, and I am absolutely delighted to have you all with us today and to welcome such a brilliant range of speakers. A huge shout out first of all to our sponsors and funders who make today possible, the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the amazing players of the National Lottery, and to the Arc Heritage. The Heritage Fund will be joining us later to share information on how you may access their funding, and the Arc Heritage will be joining us to share information about how they can support your work, particularly in relation to film and digitisation. We couldn't do this without their amazing support, and we are absolutely delighted to have them with us. So I wanted to start today by thinking about some context as to why we run events like this and what we hope to gain from them. So Sporting Heritage CIC is still a relatively young organisation. We were set up in 2012 as a direct result of the 2012 London Olympic and Paralympic Games, when people seemed to be saying, oh, we've done Sporting Heritage. And we ran our first conference a few years later. For those who may be new to our work, we're the sector support organisation and subject specialist network for anyone who works with or holds a sporting collection across the UK. And we do that by providing advice and guidance, training, digital support, and annual national events such as today's conference. Sporting heritage collections include tangible heritage, so for example, objects, record books, equipment, film and photographs, and intangible heritage, for example, oral history, songs, poetry, folklore. And this heritage is rooted in the communities it belongs to. So our original aims are clear: to better understand what sporting heritage exists, to remove sporting heritage collections from risk, to increase access and the diversity of sporting heritage, and to understand the role and value of sporting collections. And these aims have remained the same, and our new strategic plan will work to build on them and improve the sector's resilience, broaden the audiences we work with and who work with us, and increase the awareness of the importance of sporting collections and those who work with them. As a result, our role today in everything that we do is underpinned by three pillars: to elevate, educate and engage. We elevate sporting heritage stories and collections and raise awareness of sporting heritage, power it has and the role it plays across many different agendas. We educate those working with the sector on key knowledge and skill gaps that they've told us that they need support with, and we do that with support from across the sector. And we engage with a whole host of key stakeholders to ensure that the importance of these collections is understood and that we have a well-networked sector supporting each other. Few heritage sectors respond to people in the way sporting heritage does. Yes, there's this passion for sport itself, connections to sport as individuals, perhaps through playing or volunteering, or through accessing sporting venues, or as communities through combined histories, local pride and sharing identities. But whether someone has an interest in sport or not, the ability of sport to shine a light on so many different subject areas is unparalleled and means that many engage with the subject, even if they aren't into sport. Now, I'm not sure if I test this out, but I was in a meeting a few weeks ago and a self-declared non-interested in sport colleague said to me, "You can tell the history of world through sport." It was like a light bulb moment. And that about sums it up. Sporting heritage touches on scientific development, economic revolutions, social constructs and arguments. It supports education, mental health and well-being, and diversifying access to both sport and heritage. And sport is rooted within communities. It's difficult to think of another heritage focus that does all of this. And our conferences aim to draw all of that together as a snapshot in time. So on to today's event. We are so excited to be able to bring this conference to you today. We changed the format from an in-person event to an online delivery to reflect post-COVID world and the sector's needs. And it's made a difference to the people who've been able to access it, not to mention how we'd have coped with the rail strikes. Coming up, we have keynote speakers who share their passion for sport and its ability to touch on increasingly important agendas across the UK. We have some of the founders of the sporting history field discussing their thoughts on the development of sports history and opportunities for the future. And we have case studies which exemplify the role and value of sporting heritage and share their knowledge, lessons learned, and advice to others delivering sporting heritage activity. Above all, we celebrate today the work that takes shape by so many individuals and so many different organisations, and we discuss what we now need to do to continue the momentum. As I said at the start, sporting heritage as an organisation is relatively young, but so is the sector as a whole, and that means there are still many gaps in the sporting heritage story, many stories still untold, ignored or hidden, and still many to be convinced of the need to invest and support the sector. Our strategic plan and work over the coming years is aimed directly at better understanding the gaps and finding ways to fill them while shouting about the brilliant work you all do so we no longer have to argue the case for sporting heritage to be central to economic regeneration, tourism, increased access to services, for example. It'll be seen as key. So as you take part in today's event, please feel free to be a disruptor. We're not about saying everything is brilliant, haven't we done a great job? We want to know what doesn't work for you as much as what does. It's the only way we can learn, both as an organisation as the sector, and to change and respond to needs. Yes, we want to know what's good and what's working well, but we also want to know what isn't and what we can do better. So I leave you to enjoy the rest of the day and look forward to hearing your comments, discussion, thoughts and ideas. Thank you.
And now for a few words from our event sponsors, the Ark Heritage.
Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you all today. I'm Tom from the Ark Heritage, and I'm honoured to have the opportunity to discuss the important work conducted at the Ark Heritage here today. We should explore how our organisation specialises in the digitisation of film and tape collections, contributing significantly to the preservation of cultural heritage for future generations. Let's commence with an overview of the Ark Heritage. The Ark Heritage started life as the Ark in the year 2000 as a post-production company, which is still operating successfully to this day. Through the years, the Ark has offered editing, sound mixing, quality control and media services to the broadcast industry. We have evolved our services to meet with our clients' requirements, and along the way, we have become one of London's largest independent operations, trusted and accredited by the BBC, Channel 4, All Through Media, and Warner Brothers Discovery, to name a few. This accreditation serves as testament to our unwavering dedication to upholding the highest standards of quality and professionalism. Today, we're based across 2 London facilities. We've got one in London Bridge, which houses our film scanning and restoration capabilities, and one in King's Cross, where we house our edit and sound suites, as well as our grading and voiceover studios, and a very large collection of tape decks. Our organisation prides itself on a steadfast commitment to quality, communication and flexibility. With over 2 decades of experience, we have solidified our reputation as a trusted entity within the industry. As an independent facility, each project is approached with meticulous care and attention to detail, ensuring outstanding outcomes. In recent years, as broadcast technology has become more file-based, we were approached with more and more frequency by organisations wishing to digitise their film and tape collections that they had amassed over the years. With degradation of these materials becoming a real issue and more facilities closing down their digitisation operations in favour of a more modern service, this has become a priority for our clients. As a result, we formed the Ark Heritage, which offers its services to any organisations with audio and/or video collections that they are looking to save. Our expertise encompasses film scanning, where we proficiently convert analogue film sources spanning from 8mm to 35mm into pristine digital formats, ensuring their longevity and accessibility for future generations. Furthermore, our capabilities extend to tape digitisation, covering a diverse array of formats, including SD, HD, and legacy formats. Noteworthy projects include digitisation of archival materials for prestigious institutions such as the Commonwealth Games Archives and the Zaha Hadid Architect Foundation. We've also restored and remastered well-known TV series such as Doc Martin, Only Fools and Horses, Young Ones, and 40 Towers for broadcasters such as the BBC and ITV. The Arc Heritage remains steadfast in its dedication to preserving and digitising cultural heritage with unparalleled care and expertise. Whether it pertains to film scanning, tape digitisation or restoration, stakeholders can trust in our commitment to safeguarding their invaluable assets for future generations. We've got a short video now to show you, which will provide some further insight to us as an organisation, and I'll just start that for you now. Yeah, thanks very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I'm going to talk you through now a couple of our workflow case studies, just to give you a bit of a better idea of how we might be able to help your organisations and how we've saved collections in the past. The first of which is for the Farnborough Air Sciences Trust. Our partnership with the Farnborough Air Sciences Trust, we feel, showcases our commitment to preserving historical material for posterity. We had an initial meeting with the Trust, who secured funding to create a YouTube channel, and they required our help to digitise their materials in priority order, as well as applying restoration to films where required, much like in the video that we just shown you. In order to maximise their budget, we only applied a basic level of restoration to these to allow for an enhanced viewing experience on YouTube, but allowing for further restoration should the films ever be required for broadcast. By digitising over 8,000 film assets, we contributed significantly to the conservation and accessibility of invaluable historical resources. Second workflow case study is something that we did for AFC Wimbledon and the Wimbledon Sporting History, who are also Sporting Heritage members. Our collaboration with the AFC Wimbledon Sporting Heritage team exemplifies our tailored approach to each project. Through meticulous planning, execution, and post-production, we crafted a series of compelling films chronicling the club's rich history and achievements. We met with John Lynch, who is the club's vice president and who oversees the Wimbledon Sporting History organisation. Upon a meeting, we discussed what they wanted to achieve and what level of exposure they were looking for. We then sent one of our directors and our camera team to the club for a day of filming and interviews. The rushes were then brought back to our Reddit suites, and we cut a series of short films for them to use across their socials and broadcast platforms, one of which we can show you now, and I'll just prepare that for you.
I kind of like using non-formulaic approaches to what we do here as the football club. Some of that's born out of having a music and theatre background. Personally, I always like using different mediums and different approaches. We've looked at various different ways, you know, how we design and use light boxes, We've already made 2 films relating to the football club, one of them an animated cartoon, and we staged a play about our most turbulent period in 2002. We had sold-out audiences for that. Our newest piece of artwork that we've added to the stadium, which is the Greatest Team. I knew this artist. He's really famous for Formula One, so motor racing artists generally, private commissions with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, etc. I just said, how do you fancy doing an original piece on the football team? What I want is the old Plough Lane dressing room, and as you go across the picture, it morphs into the new Plough Lane dressing room. The Greatest Team wasn't person-specific, it was meant to be a reflection of the club as a whole. We used the kits from 130-odd years of history. People are all different kits. The 2 Wombles are in there. If you look closely, there's various nods to things in the past, like there's a sports bag with Crazy Gang on the side. But it is really just a reflection of the whole club history, and we do believe it's a great story, so we thought we'd have the Greatest Team as well. We decided to make a cartoon that represents the whole club's history. This cartoonist, who specialises in sports, often has his stuff on display at his local marketplace. He agreed to take it on. We negotiated a non-Premiership club deal on the price. Every time I look at it, I'm still seeing new things because it's not done in any particular formulaic order. It's just a hodgepodge of history and events and sayings. My favourite part of the cartoon, Dickie Guy, and that famous save he made from Hotshot Peter Lorimer at Leeds in 1975. We went to supporters and said, what is the most iconic image between the 2 grounds? And they said, well, the Womble Till I Die gates. And that was chosen by the fans. The old Plough Lane Stadium had these 2 blue gates, and after we'd moved out to Selhurst Park, somebody scrawled Womble Till I Die, graffitied those 2 gates, and it became an iconic image of our struggle, to bring the club back home to Merton, really, and that we wouldn't lay down and we wouldn't die. The first piece we did was the Wombles mosaic. We did a crowdfunding, 5,000 images are on that. Supporters, other clubs, ex-managers, ex-players. You can see all the families and all the people that donated it. And then we went a step further by saying, well, we know where the gates are, and maybe we should bring them back. What we'd forgotten about was that in the interim period, somebody had painted over the graffiti. As historians, we kind of like things as they were. So we painstakingly, with a lot of elbow grease and rubbing and water, removed the paint that was on top of the graffiti. So what you see up there now is the original graffiti, untouched. There was a group of people who wanted to crowdfund for a bench for the Wombles on Wimbledon Common. However, the Common Conservators, in their wisdom or not, decided it wasn't a good idea at all. But I became aware that they'd turned it down, and my first thought was, well, if the Common doesn't want it, I do. I was trying to think that Womble was being reuse, recycle. So first off, I got in touch with the only professional female wood carver in the country and said, could you do this? And she said yes. And then it was about finding the wood. So it was a 2-ton oak that had fallen. We thought Orinoco was probably one of the most iconic with Uncle Bulgaria, but Orinoco, the Elizabeth Beresford, that was about her son. So all of the different Wombles are a reflection of the characteristics of her children. And he's still a season ticket holder, so we thought Orinoco's the Womble to go for on the bench. And we had to get special permission because Orinoco always has a red scarf, and we thought he should wear a yellow and blue one. She took a chainsaw to it initially, and then some very fine chisel work. The piece of work she did on the bench was absolutely amazing. She still had half a tree left, and we'd always wanted to do the 2 winning captains, Roy Law in '63 and Dave Besant in '88. to signify that we are the only club to have won both the amateur and the professional FA Cups. We challenged her again and said, look, we'd really like these 2 cup winning captains back to back. Can we use the other half of the tree for that? Interestingly, after she'd carved them, we had to transport them down on the back of an open truck. And I think they caused quite a backlog on the M1 coming down from Yorkshire by people slowing down because there was a womble and a football statue. Obviously, being a natural product, it will require more maintenance. There is some gaps appearing. You know, they're open to the elements. So once a year, we get the woodcarver herself. She comes down, she fills any cracks, she pins things, and then she repaints them. And that's our ongoing commitment to using those natural products.
So thanks very much for watching, and thanks also to John for letting us use the piece. Finally, I'd like to talk to you about our collaboration with the Zaha Hadid Foundation. Zaha Hadid, who is, of course, the well-celebrated architect designing the arenas for some of the 2012 Olympic Games. The foundation had a large collection of VHS tapes, which they wanted to digitise. Like many organisations, although they were keen to undertake the work, there were budget constraints. We agreed an extended period for the work to be completed as a low priority project, allowing the budget to stretch further and digitise as much of the collection as possible. Working within the budget set by the client, we were able to produce full resolution files, as well as smaller viewing files, which are suitable for social media. We delivered the files back to them weekly and kept them informed on their budget, which allowed them to plan ahead. We also backed up all of the new files to a video hard drive, which was returned to the client at the end of the project, along with the tapes. Well, yeah, thank you very much for listening. On behalf of the Art Heritage, I extend my sincerest gratitude to each of you for your participation and engagement today. We eagerly anticipate the opportunity to collaborate with you on heritage preservation endeavours. I hope to meet as many of you as possible at this evening's Sport and Heritage Awards. And for those of you who cannot attend but would like further information, please do feel free to get in touch. Along with the team from Microform, we'll also be exhibiting at this year's Museum and Heritage Show at Kensington Olympia on the 15th and 16th of May. Please do feel free to come and say hello, and in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
And now moving on to our opening keynotes for today's session. I'm thrilled to say that we have both Pippa and Amazon here with us today. Double Paralympian Pippa is Wales's most successful archer with a career lasting more than 15 years. Since retiring from competing, Pippa has had a distinguished career in sports governance, including working for bodies such as Sport Wales and the British Paralympic Association. Amazon is a passionate activist and advocate for LGBT communities and Asian sports people across the world. She advises governments, sports organisations and companies on equality, diversity and inclusion, with a particular focus on race and gender. So if I stop this screen share, Pippa, can I invite you to come and deliver your keynotes?
Thank you very much, and thank you to people so far. So good morning and Bore Da. I have to say Bore Da because for those of you who don't know what that is, it's good morning in Welsh. And I felt compelled to teach you just a little bit of Welsh today, as I'm Sporting Heritage's first Welsh ambassador. Now, I wasn't just asked to be an ambassador because I'm Welsh, otherwise there would be 3.3 million ambassadors. But instead because of my sporting experience and my background. In my introduction, you've heard that I was a Paralympic archer and I was on the British team for 15 years. While on the team, I won medals at 6 consecutive World Championships and 24 international events. And I guess you've all seen my bio anyway, so you've seen the headlines. But I had a really kind of successful career. And I'd love to tell you more about it because I could talk all day on it. Me as a subject I know a lot about, of course, but I only have a limited amount of time for my keynote, so some of it will just have to wait for another time. And Justin has already spoken about the impact of sport, not just as sporty people, but also in wider society. And I like to think that I've used all of that experience that I gained in sport to now have an impact in society more generally. And I think even as a kid, I wanted the world to be a fairer place. Now, I know that life isn't fair, but it doesn't stop any of us trying, does it, to make it a fairer place. So these days in life after sport, I work in governance and administration. And I think, it might sound deathly dull, so please don't turn off, because I really want to tell you a little bit about why I'm doing what I do now, how I feel it links to sporting heritage. And I also thought I'd like to talk to you today about inspiration as I go along. So first of all, I probably ought to tell you a little bit more about my background. So I was born with a disability. I was born with something called spina bifida, which some of you will know is a condition that occurs when you're in the womb, and many children with spina bifida don't go on to learn to walk. And in fact, my parents had no idea whether I would walk or not when I was a tiny baby. But they were very determined that they didn't want me to have any restrictions in life. They didn't want me to stop doing anything at all. And they wanted me to be able to try everything. And they were really keen to get me to learn to walk. I was extremely lucky, not only to be able to learn, but also to have the kind of parents who actually encouraged me and supported me. And I was born at a time when there weren't all the kind of big range of things available these days to help you through occupational therapy. And my father built me when I was a small child. He built me a little truck with a big handle, a bit like a shopping trolley, I suppose, for me to be able to use as a walker. As I got older and heavier and leant on it more, he used to pile bricks on the front so that I didn't tip it up. So you can imagine they're very inventive, my parents, anyway. And one of the things that my parents encouraged me with really, when I was really, really small, was swimming. So my mother tells us stories of when I was really tiny about how I would just throw myself into water. I couldn't walk and I was crawling around, but I would throw myself into puddles or the canal or something. And so she thought it would probably be a really good idea for me to learn to swim. So swimming is the one thing I remember was easy as a child. Walking was difficult, swimming was easy. And I was a really keen swimmer. And I was, I guess, like a lot of people who are young, they just inspired to dream of big things in the future. And I was inspired by watching the Olympic Games by a man who lots of you will remember called David Wilkie. So I always thought David Wilkie was a rather sort of ordinary person somehow in the way he came across when he spoke on the TV. But he won a gold medal. And so I figured that, hey, if he can win a gold medal, why can't I? It's interesting, isn't it, that that these days, we're inspired by lots of people. But actually, when I think back to my childhood and I think about sporting heroes, if you want to call them that, they were all men. And yet these days, if you ask young people who's inspired them, they're as likely to say somebody like Ellie Simmons or Rebecca Adlington, to pick swimmers, as they are any kind of male swimmers. And I think that's a really amazing thing, actually. That's a great reflection on society of just how far we've come, although there's probably more to do still in that kind of gender space. So here we are, I've been an archer, and behind me on my wall, I've got some of my certificates and trophies and things. But why didn't I become a champion swimmer? Well, partly I didn't become a champion swimmer because I'm not very tall. Now, you can't tell that because I'm sat down, but I'm not even 5 foot tall. And that actually puts you at a bit of a disadvantage in the swimming pool because, by the time somebody taller than you dives in, they're already halfway up the pool and their arms are that much longer, so you're never going to reach the end before them. But I carried on swimming, and I competed in, local age grouping until I was kind of, I don't know, about 15 or 16, that kind of age, maybe a little bit. And now about 15, I stopped. And I didn't really do very much in any kind of sporting kind of thing, really. Watched a bit of sport on TV, wasn't really that bothered. and I went on to do, you know, all the kind of normal things that people do in life. You know, I finished school, finished my education, got a job, married, and it wasn't until after I got married that my husband, who was really quite active in the local community, said to me, "Do you know what, you go to work," he said, "and then you come home from work and all you do is sit down and watch TV in the evening. You ought to do something." So I thought, well, what can I do? And by chance, there was like a have a go day, and local park have a go day that you could go along, you try lots of different sports. And I went along, and it was at that point I realized that there were an awful lot of sports that just weren't inclusive. Awful lot of sports I just couldn't do. Now, plainly, with my disability, even though I could walk badly with a limp. I wasn't going to take up marathon running or hurdling or even park run. And there were things that didn't really appeal to me. Anyway, I saw the archery stand and I paid 50 pence and I shot 3 arrows and I absolutely loved it. And so I went to the back of the queue and I spent 50 pence and I shot 3 more arrows, and I spent half the afternoon until I ran out of 50 pences. So I decided maybe this was for me, that I'd like to join a club. And to be honest, to start with, I guess it was something to do. It was all about social contact, and it wasn't about becoming a champion in archery. But I really liked the challenge of the sport, that you know, that you can continually improve in it. And so I did my 6-week beginner course. I wasn't a very good archer to start with. In fact, I was very poor. Most of my 6-week course I spent missing the target instead of hitting it. But I absolutely loved that quest for perfection, you know, that feeling that maybe next time I would be able to do it right and I would get an arrow in the middle. Now, you know, being British and especially Welsh, archery is one of those things that we grow up with, I think. Almost every child that wants to try archery, don't they? They want to have a go at bows and arrows. I know when I was a kid, I found a stick and I tied a bit of string to it to make a bow. It wasn't a very good bow, as when I pulled the string back, the stick just snapped. So it didn't get very far. I could have thrown an arrow further than I could have shot it from that, but at least I tried. So I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of you out there listening who probably done something similar. If you were really lucky, maybe you went to Centre Parks and you had to go with a real bow and arrow, or you'd be to a local club or something. The thing is, we all know stories, don't we, of Robin Hood, the archers of Agincourt, and although I personally never shot an apple off anybody's head, we all know the story. So archery is really lucky that in that regard, it's an old sport. So we've got stories from generations ago about how all men by law had to practice shooting a longbow every Sunday, for example. And there's evidence of archery clubs that we know about as far back as 1480 something. And in 1787, the Royal British Bowmen started taking in female members, and the governing body, that's Archery GB, that exists today, was set up in about 1850 or something. So it's a really kind of rich history. And one of the things I find amazing actually is this bit about the, you know, before 1800, they had female members. There's another thing that I really loved about archery is that it's really inclusive. You can do it if you're a kid, you can do it if you're older. Doesn't matter if you have a disability or you don't have a disability, you're male, female, whatever age you are, you all shoot in the same club on the same shooting line at the same time. And I really like that about the sport as well. And like I said, you know, archery is so lucky to have that rich history. And I know some of it actually through a link, through a really inspirational person who was in my first archery club when I was just a beginner. So she was someone who, without whom I probably would never have gone on to compete internationally. And it's part of the reason that I'm interested in sporting heritage and why we're here, and the stories of the people who have gone before us. They're stories that inspire us to do all sorts of things. And, you know, I mean, that might be collecting football programs, or it might be training hard to be the next champion at something. But I think every single sports person that you talk to will tell you of somebody who inspired them. So one of those people for me was a member of my first club, which was Neath Archers. And there was a lady in the club called Vicky John. Now, Vicky had had polio when she was younger, and she walked with a limp. But at the time, she was the reigning British champion. And not the reigning British champion in disabled sport, but the reigning British champion in women's archery in Britain, in the able-bodied competition. And she was really great. She was a lovely person and always really, really supportive of me and encouraged me to do all sorts of things, particularly enter some local competitions. And the thing is that I entered those local competitions and I, didn't win anything to start with. And I started winning a couple of small things. And then I started entering bigger competitions and then entering bigger competitions. And then I was encouraged to enter the British Championships. And I came second in the British Championships that year. And I was looking at the scores for the British team, and I discovered that my scores really weren't very far away from the ones that I needed to qualify to shoot internationally. And I just thought, you know what, if I go out and I get a bit of training, a coach, maybe some better equipment, maybe I can work towards a goal of getting onto the team. And I did all of those things. Within 12 months, I was on the team. Another 12 months, I went to my first World Championships and I ended up on the podium at those championships. And I got on the podium at every single one after that. The thing is, it was because of her that she made me see that if you want something, you should go out and get it, first of all. And secondly, because she had a disability, I just thought, well, maybe if she could do it, I could do it. And there's an expression in life that says, if you can see it, you can be it. And that was really true for me. And I think it opened my eyes to a world of really wanting to encourage more diversity, more inclusion, because it shouldn't just be, disability archery that we're looking at. If you can see it, you can be it. It should be wider in society, shouldn't it? Her husband, Marley, who went on to be our club president, used to collect all things archery. So he had books and scrapbooks and clippings and medals and trophies, and you name it, he collected it. And people used to bring him things. He was quite famous in our club, I guess, from all over the place. And I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here, I know, but I'm sure he must have had a house full of things. The thing is, I don't live in Neath any longer, and it's years and years and years since I was a member of the club. And years and years and years since I saw him. I have no idea what happened to that collection of items. No idea at all. I know that he's no longer with us. So what's happened to all of this? Where does all of this stuff go? And of course, archery, is rich with lots of stuff like this. So maybe it doesn't matter. I don't think that's true. But if you've got lots of it, does it matter if some of it's lost? I don't know. But Sporting Heritage cares about all of this. And so we really need to kind of spread the word and gain some greater awareness, I think, so that collections like his don't get lost in the future. So after my 15 years anyway, at top level, I retired. And when I did, I didn't quite know what to do with myself. I didn't want to make a collection of stuff like Marley, although I appear to have a bit of a collection behind me. And I wanted to give something back to sport, and I knew that. And it's a very strange time transition for an athlete, because you spend so long training. People say, what do? You say, oh, I'm a Paralympic archer. And then one day they say, what do you do? And you say, oh, I don't know, because you've got to kind of reinvent your whole life. And so that's actually what I did. And I was inspired by something that happened when I was a para archery athlete representative for World Archery, which is something that I did about midpoint in my career. And we had a category at the time for men only. And given that we already know there were women joining archery clubs before 1800, I thought this was just plain wrong. So in my first meeting, I asked why it was, and I was told that there weren't enough women with this kind of disability characteristic. Well, of course not. You know, if you're not going to have a category for women, then there's no women going to be competing in it. So I wanted to do something about it. And at my next tournament, I went to women around the world and I got, you know, numbers from them about how many women they thought they had in their country. And armed with that evidence, I went back to the next meeting. And a year later, we had a new chair and the Secretary General supported me, got behind me. And to cut a very long story short, that event is now in the Paralympics. And I'm really proud of my small part in it. So the thing is, it made me realize that if we want to tackle injustice or make sure things are safe, or make it possible even for everyone to take part, and somebody has to be at a board table asking those kinds of questions. It's no good just sitting around and complaining about things. So I decided that I wanted to be that person who was going to ask the questions. So I applied to get onto the board of Disability Sport Wales to start with. And I was successful. And then I was made chair of Disability Sport Wales, and that gave me a real kind of eye-opener into the whole world of governance. And I decided that I would get some qualifications in corporate governance to really kind of help me in my mission, I suppose. So since then, I've been on the board of Archery GB. I was vice chair of UK Anti-Doping, vice chair of Sport Wales and Paralympics GB, to name just a few. Hey, they even asked me to be an ambassador for Sporting Heritage, which is why I'm here today. So I really wanted to finish by telling you about something somebody said to me recently. And they said to me, well, many of us can point to someone who has inspired us. And I've shared a little bit of that with you today. But we never stop to think that in turn, we might do something that inspires somebody else. So I never really thought about it that way. So I really want to leave you with that thought, because I bet there are a lot of you who are doing what you're doing right now because you've been inspired to do it. But actually, you must be inspiring others who come behind you, and makes us all part of that kind of big sporting heritage story, doesn't it? So I really want you to think about that. So I want to thank you so much for your time today. I hope you go on to hear some really great speakers. Diolch yn fawr, which is thank you very much for listening. Thank you for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you, Pippa. And you're right, we're all part of this longer, bigger, ever-running sporting heritage record, which I hope that, you know, everybody, as you say, is working towards making sure it's populated with all those rich stories. So thank you very much. Amazon, can I invite you to turn your camera on and deliver your keynote, please?
Good morning, everybody. So lovely to be here. I have to also say a very warm welcome to those that are in Australia. I've just noticed that there's Jed Smith from the Australian Sports Museum online. So just a little bit of background about myself. I'm ethnically Vietnamese, but I'm also Australian and British, and I started my sports career in Australia. And I do, as well as with the UK government, I do a lot of work with the Australian government around the world, around looking through the lens to champion equality. So let me start with my background. I never set out to be an advocate in the sports space at all. For me, there was just one simple message of the power of storytelling and what this means. So let me start with a thought for all of you through my keynote, that the face of the UK and Australia has changed, but sport hasn't. And I love what Pippa mentioned, and I will turn this on its head, that you can't be what you can't see, but can you be what you can't see? And that's particularly in sport. And for me, I look through an intersectional lens through gender, race, and being parts of the LGBTQ community. And how I started all this sports advocacy work that you see today really started with that one simple step. I spent my formative years growing up in the northern suburbs of Sydney, Australia, when Asians were just coming into the country. And when I first stepped out into sports when I was about 6, I did not see myself. I was the only Asian kid in sports out of the athletes, out of the sports organizations. I did not see myself in the coaching world. So I instantly saw how the sports world saw someone that looked like me, looked very different in terms of the massive amounts of racism and discrimination that I saw just by being Asian in sports. And how it compounded and how it made it really difficult was that I did not see my sporting heritage in sports. I did not see a story that was my story coming from the Asian community. And struggling with my sexuality at that time, you know, unlike now, you see so many more out athletes, and there's a wider support network for if you're LGBTQ in sports, though there are still many struggles, which I will also touch upon. And I didn't see any LGBTQ athletes in sports, nor did I hear any stories, but I loved what sports did for me. And I went back to that same question that I just asked you now, is that, can you be what you can't see? I started in the world of bodybuilding at a very young age. At 6, I picked up my first dumbbells, and I started going to the gym at between 7 and 8. I found team sports to be a very hostile environment. Because I was the only Asian kid in sports, I found it very difficult to be in a team that was very discriminatory and very racist towards my ethnicity. I was actually pushed out of athletics. I was doing sprinting at the time because my coach and team felt that being Asian, being shorter, and that stereotype that Asians are petite, our limbs are shorter, we're not as fast in many more athletic sports. I was actually told by my coach that I was slowing down the team, and I was pushed out of my team sports, and I was advised that long distance running was so much better for someone that looked like me because we were much slower. And so when I entered into long distance running, I actually loved it. For the first time, I felt like I could be myself because it was an individual sport, and I exceeded in that sport. But I always felt that I needed more. So when I started weight training, when I started going to the gym between 7 or 8, I loved what this really unique sport did for me. It gave me the confidence and the self-worth to see myself for the first time. And I think for many people that start sports, they want a sense of community, but also to be able to see themselves for the first time. And that's what sports did for me, and particularly bodybuilding. And that age, I had no idea what I was doing. So I went from a world of racism and discrimination to a completely misogyny, sexist, adult, straight, white world in bodybuilding of, you know, misogyny and sexism. So I encountered a tremendous amount of discrimination on many different fronts. But I just loved the sports and how it changed my body, even at that age, and how I felt fantastic. And even though I didn't know what the word sporting heritage was, I started to learn about sports history through the lens of bodybuilding, and to see people that were very different, but also were able to celebrate themselves through sports. And, you know, when I look online, and everyone's from a very interesting background, on the conference today. I think you all have a part to play in sporting heritage, so people like me can see themselves in sports and celebrate themselves through sports. So when I think of countries like Australia, the UK, Canada, and America, the Asian community is the fastest growing community in these countries. Australia, for example, had this explosion over the last 20 years. And in some parts, and I know Jed Smith on the line would be able to acknowledge this coming from Melbourne, you know, in some parts of Australia, 1 in 2 people are Asian, but still sports does not reflect the changing face of the country. And that's the same when you think of the UK in terms of how rapidly the face of the UK is changing, but sports has remained the same. So if you think of the last major world sports events, like the Commonwealth Games, like the Olympics that we've had in the last few years, when the UK, same as Australia, have sent hundreds of athletes to whichever country is hosting these events. Out of those many hundreds, only around 7 to 10 of those athletes came from a background that looked like me. And I actually counted at the last Olympics, the country that had the most Asian athletes was around about, I think around about nearly 14, that was Canada. And that's such a small amount considering that countries send hundreds of athletes to these events. So as I'm talking, just continually think of the work that you're doing and, you know, is everyone at the table when you're thinking about sporting heritage, when you're thinking about archiving, when you're thinking about the people in the sports that you're wanting to display. Because someone like myself, my journey was just so difficult because I had to imagine the person that I wanted to become in sports without ever seeing myself in sports. So with my journey with bodybuilding, I always use this anecdote of Arnold Schwarzenegger because I had absolutely no idea in terms of what I was doing at the gym, but I spent so much time in reception reading the bodybuilding magazines. And that was golden because for the first time, I saw my sporting heritage through the eyes of not someone that was Asian, but someone that was different, who had a different name, who came from a different place, had a foreign accent, but was able to celebrate their heritage and who they were in sports. And for me, that was just so golden because for the first time I saw myself in sports. And that was the only story in sports history that I was able to latch onto, but then able to believe that through Arnold Schwarzenegger's story, that I was, 1, able to make an impact through sports, 2, was able to see myself celebrated in sports, and 3, see myself in the future in sports. So I went on to become a competitive bodybuilding. I competed in the Australian circuits. I was the only Asian competing in bodybuilding then at the time. And it was still very difficult because it was just so unusual to see an Asian female competing in bodybuilding and breaking down these stereotype barriers of what it means to be an Asian person. But it really helped me. And that kind of led me on the journey that I have today in terms of all the advocacy work that I do in sports, because when I look at sports today, I still don't see the Asians at elite level participating in sports, and even at the coaching level, even behind in the business sector of sports. Of sports. And so when you're thinking of your work in sporting heritage, it's so important to think of all Asian people, not just South, but also East Asian people, and also the positive reinforcements of sporting heritage stories, because so many times when Asian people are talked about in sports in the media, it's about the negative connotations in terms of the lifetime of racism that we've received, the lifetime of discrimination, but it's so important to hear about the heroes within sports. So through my journey, I became the first Asian LGBTQ athlete in the world to simultaneously hold multiple sports ambassador roles. I hold 10 at the moment. I'm working with Stonewall, Athlete Ally in the US. I've just become a Pride House ambassador for the Paris 2024 Olympics. I was a Pride House ambassador for the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. I am working with the World Cup around the 2026 Games with the Centre for Sports and Human Rights. I speak to governments, sports organizations, and corporates all around the world around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and around how we can look through the lens of sports to champion equality, and how do we gain and engage more marginalized communities to participate in sports, but also to see themselves in sports. On a side note, I'm part of the Team Biden campaign for the second term. I'm one of their Asian and LGBTQ advisors for their 2024 campaign. But, you know, as I said, I never set out to be a sports advocate. It really just came from my own journey of not seeing myself in sports, and also now continually not seeing myself in sports, and thinking back when I was 6 and what it would have meant to see my sports heritage, to see Asians participating in sports, and to see LGBTQ participating in sports. And I hope throughout all the work that you're doing, that we are able to change the landscape of sports moving forward, that when we send athletes to these major sports events like the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games, or to have local sports events where we see a team of 20 athletes, we just don't see one Asian athlete or one LGBTQ athlete, that half of our athletes look like someone like myself. So it's really important to think about, you know, what you're doing at a national level, but what you're doing at a local level within your own communities as well, to champion sports heritage across different ethnic minority groups. And also allyship is important, as I noticed that some of you on this call are from the Black community or other communities working in your own communities in sports. You know, there is a cross-pollination of how different ethnic groups supported each other through sporting heritage, and what that meant in terms of how I see myself in sports. And I think having those conversations in sports heritage are so important. So just lastly, just for me to leave you and come back to that original question of, you know, you can't be what you can't see, but can you be what you can't see in sports? And continually think about how difficult it is for people that cannot see themselves in sports to constantly have to imagine a world of sports where they see themselves, a world of sports where every facet of sports, they can see themselves in sports. And, you know, it's up to all of us on that call, this call today, to make it so much easier for that 6-year-old person that looks like me, or that person now who wants to step out into sports, but also wants to go to a museum or look online and see their sporting heritage. Thank you very much for listening today. And I noticed that, you know, if you want to follow me, you can at Amazon Letty on social media, amazonletty.com, or you can obviously send me an email as well at a.le@amazonletty.com.
Lovely. Thanks, Amazon. And thank you to Pippa as well. I think you both set the tone brilliantly for the rest of today's conference. I'm going to wrap it up now as we're going to jump into our first panel discussion. But thank you so much to both Amazon and Pippa. I'll see you in our first panel discussion. The links for the panel discussion are in your delegate pack, and I hope to see you there in a couple of minutes. Thank you and goodbye.